Dear students, today we are reading a play, Mother's Day, written by John Boynton Priestley. And this is part 2. Mrs. Pearson and Mrs. Fitzgerald have just changed their bodies using a spell which Mrs. Fitzgerald had learned out east. So now, after changing their bodies, Mrs. Pearson, now with Mrs. Fitzgerald's personality, says, "See what I mean, dear?" She notices the cigarette and she says, "Here, you don't want that." And she snatches it and puts it in her own mouth, puffing contentedly. Here, after changing their bodies, now Mrs. Pearson is having Mrs. Fitzgerald's personality. And she says, "See what I mean, dear?" Noticing the cigarette in her hand, she says, "Here, you don't want that." And she snatches. She grabs, or quickly seizes a cigarette from her hands, and she puts it in her own mouth, puffing contentedly. We know that Mrs. Fitzgerald is smoking a cigarette. Now, Mrs. Pearson is having Mrs. Fitzgerald's personality, and she is taking the cigarette from her hand. She puts the cigarette in her own mouth, puffing contentedly. To puff means to throw puffs out while smoking. Contentedly means in a way that expresses happiness or satisfaction. Her spell worked. Mrs. Fitzgerald, now with Mrs. Pearson's personality, looks down at herself and sees that her body has changed and gives a scream of fright. Mrs. Fitzgerald is now having Mrs. Pearson's personality. She looks down at herself and sees that her body has changed, and she screams. She gives a scream of fright. Scream means cry, and fright means a feeling of fear, dread, or terror. A scream of fright means a loud cry of fear. You might scream in fright while watching a scary movie, for example. She understood what has happened. They have changed their personalities. Now, Mrs. Fitzgerald is actually having Mrs. Pearson's personality in order to deal with her family members who are not appreciating their hard work. She says, "Oh, it has happened." She is surprised and happy that her spell worked. Mrs. Pearson says complacently, "Of course it has happened. Very neat. Didn't know I had it in me." This is now Mrs. Fitzgerald's personality in Mrs. Pearson's body. She says complacently. Complacently means feeling happy and satisfied. She says, "Of course it's happened. Very neat. Very neat, very tidy. Done with an efficiency, skillfully. I didn't know I had it in me." Mrs. Fitzgerald says, alarmed, "But whatever shall I do, Mrs. Fitzgerald? George and the children can't see me like this." Now here we can see that their names don't change, but they have already changed their personalities. Here, Mrs. Fitzgerald is actually Mrs. Pearson, and she says, "What shall I do now, Mrs. Fitzgerald? George, her husband, and the children can't see me like this." Mrs. Pearson says grimly. Grimly means in a very serious, gloomy, or depressing manner, harshly, or in an unrelenting manner despite hardship. grimly means gloomy. She says, they aren't going to. That's the point. They aren't going to see her like this. They will not even notice. They will just notice the change in the character. They'll have me to deal with. Only they won't know it. They will not even know that they are dealing with me. Mrs. Fitzgerald, who is actually Mrs. Pearson, is still alarmed. She's still worried, startled, disturbed. She says, but what if we can't change back? It would be terrible. It would be horrible if we can't change back. And Mrs. Pearson, who is actually Mrs. Fitzgerald, says, here, steady, Mrs. Pearson. If you had to live my life, it wouldn't be so bad. You'd have more fun as me than you've had as you. She says, here, steady. Steady means stable, like be normal. If you had to live my life, it would not be so bad. You would have more fun as me. And Mrs. Fitzgerald, who is now Mrs. Pearson, says, yes, but I don't want to be anybody else. And Mrs. Pearson, who is now, let's not forget, Mrs. Fitzgerald, says, now stop worrying, it's easier changing back. I can do it anytime we want. And Mrs. Fitzgerald, who is now Mrs. Pearson, says, well, I don't know. She was not expecting this. Mrs. Pearson, let's not forget, she is now Mrs. Fitzgerald. She says, not likely. I've got to deal with your family first. That's the idea, isn't it? Didn't know how to begin with them, you said. Well, I'll show you. Here, Mrs. Fitzgerald will show her how to deal with her family. We have seen that Mrs. Fitzgerald has taken Annie's hand and spoke some magic words. She took the hand of Mrs. Annie Pearson and she spoke some magic words. A transformation has taken place and the personality of Mrs. Fitzgerald shifted into the body of Mrs. Pearson and vice versa. Mrs. Pearson is scared, but Mrs. Fitzgerald assures her that the change is reversible. Mrs. Fitzgerald, now in the body of Mrs. Pearson, stays at Mrs. Pearson's house and she will send Mrs. Pearson in Mrs. Fitzgerald's body to her own house where she can relax. Mrs. Fitzgerald, who is now Mrs. Pearson, says, but what am I going to do? And Mrs. Pearson, who is now Mrs. Fitzgerald, says, go into my house for a bit. There is nobody there. Then pop back and see how we are doing. You ought to enjoy it. Better get off now before one of them comes. She is sending her into her own house. She says there is nobody back. Go there and relax for a bit. Then pop back. Pop back means then return. Pop back means to return to some place very quickly or briefly, to move back suddenly. And then see how we are doing. You ought to enjoy it. Better get off now before one of them comes. Get off, to get off means to go away. Before the family members come. And Mrs. Fitzgerald, now she is Mrs. Pearson, is nervously rising. She stands up and she says, yes, I suppose that's best. You're sure it will be all right? And Mrs. Pearson, who is now Mrs. Fitzgerald, she says, chuckling, it'll be wonderful. Now off you go, dear. Chuckling means laughing quietly, laughing in a suppressed manner. She laughs and she says, it'll be wonderful. Now off you go, dear. Off you go means you can leave now. If you want someone to go away or go home, you will say, off you go, instead of get lost. Get lost is a rude way to say go. Off you go is more polite way to tell someone that he can leave, he or she. Mrs. Fitzgerald crosses and hurries out through the door right. Left to herself, Mrs. Pearson smokes away, lighting another cigarette, and begins laying out the cards for solitaire. This is solitaire, a card game, on the table. Now Mrs. Fitzgerald, who is actually Mrs. Pearson, she goes away, and Mrs. Pearson, who is now Mrs. Fitzgerald, she continues smoking. She lights another cigarette and she lays out the cards on the table. She's playing a solitaire. This is a game of cards that only one person plays. After a few moments, Doris Pearson comes bursting in left. To burst in means to come in suddenly. To come with a great force. She is a pretty girl in her early 20s who would be pleasant enough if she had not been spoiled. Spoiled means pampered. Here it means rude or badly behaved due to pampering. She would be nice and pleasant enough only if she had not been spoiled and pampered. Here we meet Doris. Doris is the daughter of Mrs. Pearson, who is about 20 years old. Before she had taken anything in, she says, "Mom, you'll have to iron my yellow silk. I must wear it tonight." She now sees what is happening and is astounded. "What are you doing?" And she moves down left center. When she comes, before she has taken anything in, before she got any perception of what is happening, she tells her mother immediately, "Mom, you'll have to iron my yellow silk. You'll have to press my clothes, my yellow silk." To iron means to press with an iron. Before she has taken anything in means before she understood what's going on. To take something in means to completely understand the meaning or importance of something. And then she sees her mother is smoking, and she is astounded. Astounded means surprised, startled, or astonished. "What are you doing?" she asks her, and she moves down left center. Mrs. Pearson, who is now, we know, Mrs. Fitzgerald, she uses her ordinary voice, but her manner is not flattering and apologetic, but cool and incisive. We know that Mrs. Pearson is now Mrs. Fitzgerald in Mrs. Pearson's body. She uses her ordinary voice, her typical usual voice, but her manner is not flattering and apologetic, but cool and incisive. Her manner is not flattering. Flattering means unsteady. Apologetic means remorseful or sorry. She is behaving cool and incisive. Cool means indifferent. Incisive means sharp-witted. It means a person who is clear thinking, who is intelligently analytical. And she says, not even looking up. She didn't even look up. "What do you think I'm doing?" "Whitewashing the ceiling." She tells Doris, "What do you think I'm doing?" "Whitewashing the ceiling." Whitewashing means painting with whitewash. Ceiling means the upper interior surface of a room or other similar compartment. Doris is still astounded. She is startled. She says, "But you are smoking." "That's right, dear. No law against it, is there?" There is no law against smoking, is there? But I thought you didn't smoke. Then you thought wrong. Are we having tea in the kitchen? Have it where you like, dear. On hearing this, Doris is angry. She asks, "Do you mean it isn't ready?" She says, "What do you mean by that? Do you mean the tea is not ready?" "Yours isn't. I've had all I want. Might go out later and get a square meal at the Clarendon." This is the reply Doris gets. "Your tea isn't done. Me, I have had all I want. I might go out later and get a square meal." Square meal means a full, complete, satisfying meal. And Clarendon is a hotel. Her mother, or at least the person who Doris thinks it's her mother, tells her that "I haven't prepared any tea and I think I will go out later and have a good meal at the hotel, at the Clarendon." Doris is shocked, hardly believing her ears. She cannot believe what she is hearing. She says, "Who might?" Because they are not used to their mother behaving this way. They are not used to their mother going out. "I might. Who do you think?" And Doris is staring at her. She is looking intently at her. She says, "Mom, what's the matter with you?" "Don't be silly." Doris is still very surprised. Indignantly, she says, "It's not me that's being silly. And I must say, it's a bit much when I've been working hard all day and you can't even bother to get my tea ready. Did you hear what I said about my yellow silk?" Doris is very surprised by the behavior of her mother. Silly means foolish. Her mother tells her, "Don't be foolish." And Doris indignantly means with annoyance, angrily, or in a manner indicating anger or annoyance at something perceived as unfair. She tells her, "It's not me that is being foolish, and I must say it's a bit much. It's too much for me. I have been working hard all day and you can't even bother to get my tea ready." To bother means to care. "Did you hear what I said about my yellow silk?" "No." "Don't you like it now?" "I never did." Doris, again surprised, says, "Of course I like it, and I'm going to wear it tonight. So I want it ironed." "Want it ironed? What do you think it's going to do? It's going to do? Iron itself." "No, you're going to iron it for me. You always do." Doris is used to her mother ironing her clothes. She is used to her mother doing all the chores without questioning. She says, "No, you are going to iron it for me. You always do." Doris doesn't understand her mother's humor. Her mother, or at least the person she thinks it's her mother, is being sarcastic. "Well, this time I don't. And don't talk rubbish to me about working hard. I have a good idea how much you do, Doris Pearson. I put in twice the hours you do and get no wages nor thanks for it. Why are you going to wear your yellow silk? Where are you going?" Her mother tells her, "This time, I don't. I'm not going to iron your clothes this time. And don't talk nonsense. Don't talk rubbish to me about working hard. I've got a good idea. I know very well how much you do. I put in twice the hours you do. Means I'm working twice harder than you and I get no wages. I'm not getting paid for what I do. I don't even get thanks for it." And then she asks her, "Why are you going to wear your yellow silk? Where are you going?" Doris is sulking. Sulkily means a way that is sulky. it means refusing to smile or be pleasant to people, usually because you're angry about something. She tells her, out with Charlie Spence. She's going out with Charlie Spence, and that is why she needs her yellow silk ironed. Why? Doris says wildly. Wildly means in a way that lacks discipline or restraint. She says, why? What's the matter with you? Why shouldn't I go out with Charlie Spence if he asks me and I want to? Any objections? Go on, you might as well tell me. Her daughter, Doris, is telling her in a way that lacks restraint or discipline. She tells her, I hope you don't have any objections. Objections means opposing to a thing. You might as well tell me, what is your problem? Mrs. Pearson, who is we know already, Mrs. Fitzgerald, severely means strictly or harshly, she tells her, can't you find anybody better? I wouldn't be seen dead with Charlie Spence, buck-teeth and half-witted. I wouldn't be seen dead. Seen dead means if you say that you wouldn't be seen dead or be caught dead with someone, it means you would never ever do it. It indicates strong dislike or disapproval. She says, he has buck teeth and he is half-witted. Buck teeth means upper set of teeth that are sticking out. An upper teeth or tooth that projects over the lower lip. And half-witted means stupid, foolish, or ignorant, of a dull mind. She expresses her views about Charlie Spence. Doris says he isn't. When I was your age, I'd have found somebody better than Charlie Spence, or given myself up as a bad job. She says, when I was your age, I would rather find somebody better, or given myself up as a bad job, or given up on myself. Now Doris is nearly in tears. She tells her, oh, shut up. Now Doris runs out left. Mrs. Pearson chuckles and begins putting the cards together. Mrs. Pearson chuckles. She laughs. Chuckle is a quiet or suppressing laugh, and she puts her cards together again. After a moment, Cyril Pearson enters left. He is Doris's brother and Mrs. Pearson's son. He is the masculine counterpart of Doris. Masculine means male. Counterpart means equal. It refers to a person or a thing that corresponds to or has the same function as another person. It means Cyril is same like Doris, but he's male. Now Cyril is Mrs. Pearson's son, who is equally demanding and never sympathizes with his mother. He comes and briskly, fast or quickly, he says, hello mom, tea ready? No. He is moving to the table, annoyed, irritated, or angry. He says, why not? And Mrs. Pearson says, coolly, in a calm manner, she says, I couldn't bother. I couldn't bother means not willing to make an effort. I couldn't bother means I don't care. He asks her, feeling off color or something. Off color means not feeling well or in low spirits. If you say that you are feeling off color, then it means that you are slightly ill. She says, never felt better in my life. Cyril is now behaving aggressively. Aggressively means in a determined and forceful way, in a violent mood. He says, what's the idea then? he's saying, why are you behaving like this? She says, just a change. Again, Cyril briskly says, well, snap out of it, Ma, and get cracking. Haven't too much time. Briskly means quickly. He tells her, snap out of it, Ma. Snap out of it means to get out of a bad or unhappy mood by a sudden effort. Wake up, Ma, and get cracking. Get cracking means work quickly, act quickly, or do it very quickly. This is a phrase of crack. Haven't too much time. I don't have much time. I must go. Cyril is about to go when Mrs. Pearson's voice checks him. He is about to go when he hears the answer from his mother, or at least the person whom he considers it's his mother. She says, I've plenty of time. It means I have a lot of time. Yes, but I haven't got a busy night tonight. He's moving left to the door. Did you put my things out? Cyril says that he doesn't have much time and he's going to be busy. He asks his mother, did you put my things out? It means, did you lay out my clothes? And Mrs. Pearson coolly says, can't remember, but I doubt it. I can't remember have I laid out your clothes, but I doubt I did. Cyril is moving to the table, protesting. He is very surprised to see his mother behaving like this. And he tells her, now look, when I asked you this morning, you promised. You said you'd have to look through them first in case there was any mending. He says, you promised today. You will have to look through my clothes first in case there was any mending needed, some repairing or fixing needed. Well, yes, his mother says. Now I've decided I don't like mending. She said, now I've decided I don't like fixing and repairing your clothes. Cyril says, that's a nice way to talk. What would happen if we all talked like this? He is very surprised that his mother is talking to him in this way. And Mrs. Pearson, who is of course Mrs. Fitzgerald, in Mrs. Pearson's body, she says, you all do talk like that. If there is something at home you don't want to do, you don't do it. If it's something at your work, you get the union to bar it. Now all that's happened is that I've joined the movement. She says that it's not only me who talks like this. You all talk like this. If there is something at home you don't want to do, you just don't do it. And if it's something at your work, you get the union to bar it, to ban it, or to prohibit it. And now she says, I have joined the movement. I have joined the association of employees. Cyril is saying, I don't get this, Mom. What's going on? He is startled. And his mother, or at least the person that he thinks is his mother, is laconic, and in a laconic and sinister way, she says, changes. Laconic means brief, concise, or short. And sinister, be said, means giving the impression that something wrong or evil is going to happen. She's saying in this way, there are changes. Some things have changed. Now Doris enters left. She is in the process of dressing and is now wearing a wrap. She looks pale and red-eyed. Doris has been crying. She enters the room. She is in the process of dressing and she is wearing a wrap. Wrap means a long piece of cloth that a woman wears around her shoulders to keep her warm. It is a covering. She is pale in the face from the shock. and red-eyed because she was crying. She has eyes red from crying. Her mother, or at least the person they think it's their mother, says, "You look terrible. You look horrible. I wouldn't wear that face even for Charlie Spence." "I wouldn't wear that face" means you look so bad. It means to show a particular emotion on your face. To look like this. You look horrible. And we must admit that Mrs. Fitzgerald, who is in Mrs. Pearson's body, has a very good sense of humor. She says, "I wouldn't look like that even if I was going to meet Charlie Spence. You look absolutely horrible." Doris is angry. She moves above the table and she says, "Oh, shut up about Charlie Spence. And anyhow, I'm not ready yet. Just dressing. And if I do look terrible, it's your fault. You made me cry." Now Cyril comes and curiously says, "Why? What did she do?" And Doris says, "Never your mind." It means, don't bother, it's not important. Cyril is curious. He is eager to know, why is Doris crying? What happened before he came? But Doris doesn't want to tell him. She says, "Don't bother, it's not important. Never your mind." Mrs. Pearson, or Mrs. Fitzgerald, is rising and preparing to move to the kitchen. She says, "Have we any stout left? I can't remember." Stout is a strong, dark beer. Cyril says, "Bottle or two, I think, but you don't want stout now." His mother is moving left slowly and she says, "Oh yes, I do. I do want some beer." Cyril says, "What for?" And Mrs. Pearson, or Mrs. Fitzgerald in Mrs. Pearson's body, is turning at the door. She goes away and she tells him, "To drink." "What do you mean for what? I needed to drink." "You clot." You clot means you idiot, you fool. It means a foolish or clumsy person. And this is how Mrs. Pearson exits right. Instantly, in that very moment, Cyril and Doris are in a huddle, close together at left center, rapidly whispering. This is a description of Cyril and Doris and how should they be behaving on the stage. Mrs. Pearson, or Mrs. Fitzgerald in Mrs. Pearson's body, she exits, she goes out, and in the same moment, Cyril and Doris are in a huddle. In a huddle means they come close together to talk. They crowd together or nestle closely. And they are rapidly whispering. They are talking in whispers, in a low voice. Rapidly means quickly. This is what the talk is all about. "Has she been like that with you too?" Doris asks. "Yes. No tea ready. Couldn't care less." Couldn't care less means not concerned or interested at all. Couldn't care less means you don't care about it at all. You cannot care less than you do. Doris says, "Well, I'm glad it's both of us. I'm glad it's not only me. I thought I'd done something wrong." Doris says, "I thought it is me who has done something wrong." Cyril says, "So did I." "But it's her, of course." Doris says, "She was smoking and playing cards when I came in. I couldn't believe my eyes." I asked her if she was feeling off color, and she said she wasn't. "Well, she's suddenly all different, and that's what made me cry," Doris says. "It wasn't what she said, but the way she said it, and the way she looked." Cyril says, "Haven't noticed that. She looks just the same to me." Cyril doesn't see any difference in the way his mother looks. But Doris says, she does look different to me. Do you think she could have hit her head or something, and got, what is it, Doris says, to me she looks very different. Do you think she could have hit her head or something? Because she is behaving very strange. And Cyril says, do you mean she's barmy? Barmy means insane, mad or crazy. Do you think she has gone mad? Doris says, no, you fathead. Concussion. She might have. Fathead means idiot. She says, I know, what is it? I'm trying to remember. Concussion. Concussion happens when you hit your head. She might have a concussion. Concussion is a serious injury to the head that results in temporary loss of normal brain function. It is a violent shock. Cyril says, sounds far-fetched. Far-fetched means unlikely or not probable. Exaggerated. Well, she's far-fetched, Doris says, if you ask me. And she suddenly begins to giggle. She starts to laugh in a silly manner. Now then, what is it? Her brother asks her. Doris says if she's going to be like this when Dad comes home, and then she laughs again. She cannot even imagine what will happen if their mother behaves like this in front of their father. Cyril begins to guffaw. Guffaw means a loud and hearty laugh. It means to laugh loudly. Cyril laughs loudly and he says, I'm staying in for that. 2 front dress circles for the first house. Cyril and his sister Doris seem to be amused. They cannot imagine what will happen when their father comes home and their mother is behaving in the same way. Now, Mrs. Pearson enters right carrying a bottle of stout, a bottle of dark beer, and a half-filled glass. She had already filled her glass. Cyril and Doris try to stop their laughing and giggling, but they're not quick enough. Mrs. Pearson regards them with contempt. To regard with contempt means to regard with disgust. If you regard something or someone with a feeling such as dislike or disrespect, you have that feeling about them. It means to regard with disgust. To regard means to consider or to think. Contempt refers to disgust. She's looking at them and she says in a cold way, you two are always talking about being grown up. Why don't you both try for once to be your age? And she moves to this sofa and she sits. She says, you two should behave according to your age. Why are you giggling? Cyril says, can't we laugh now? And his mother, or at least the person they think it's their mother, says, yes, it's funny, go on, tell me, make me laugh. I could do with it. She says, I could do with some laugh. Tell me what's so funny. And Doris says, you know you never understood our jokes, Mom. And Mrs. Pearson, or Mrs. Fitzgerald says, I was yawning at your jokes before you were born, Doris. To yawn means to open your mouth wide and take a deep breath, usually as a reaction to boredom. Yawning means opening the mouth wide and breathing deeply. I was yawning at your jokes before you were even born, Doris. Mrs. Fitzgerald really has a good sense of humor. Now Doris is almost tearful again. She cannot believe her mother is talking to her in this way. She says, what's making you talk like this? What have we done? And Mrs. Pearson, or Mrs. Fitzgerald, says in a prompt manner, without delay, very quickly, immediately, she says. Nothing but came in, ask for something, go out again, then come back when there is nowhere else to go. She's making fun of them. How inconsiderate they are. They just go inside, ask for something, go out, and then they come back when there is nowhere else to go. Aggressively, Cyril says, "Look, if you won't get tea ready, then I'll find something to eat myself." "Why not? Help yourself." And she takes a sip of beer. Cyril is turning on his way to the kitchen. He's going to the kitchen and he says, "Mind you, I think it's a bit thick. I've been working all day." A bit thick means it's unreasonable. It is unfair. I have been working all day and you're behaving like this. Doris agrees. She says, "Same here. I have been also working all day and upon coming home, this is what I get." But their mother is very calm. She says, 8-hour day. This is how much they work. Cyril says, "Yes, 8-hour day. And don't forget it." And his mother says, "I've done my 8 hours." Cyril says, "Well, that's different." Doris confirms, "Of course it is different." But their mother says, "It was, now it isn't. 40-hour week for all now. Just watch it at the weekend when I have my 2 days off." She's telling them that she's going to take 2 days off at the weekend. Doris and Cyril exchange alarmed glances. They cannot believe what they are hearing. And they stare at Mrs. Pearson, who returns the look calmly. Mrs. Pearson looks very calm. And these two are very alarmed, very confused, and they're looking at each other. Cyril says, "Must grab something to eat. Looks as if I'll need to keep my strength up." He exits to the kitchen. He says, "I must eat something. I must keep my strength up." Doris moves to the sofa, anxiously. Anxiously means in a manner resulting from or revealing anxiety. She moves to the sofa and she asks, "Mummy, you don't mean you're not going to do anything on Saturday and Sunday? Are you saying you're not going to do anything on Saturday and Sunday?" And she says, "Early." Early means carelessly, in a very relaxed manner. She says, "No, I wouldn't go that far. I might make a bed or two and do a bit of cooking as a favor." As a favor means some approving attitude or goodwill. Out of goodwill, I might do some cooking or make a bed or two. Which means, of course, I'll have to be asked very nicely and thanked for everything, and generally made a fuss of. She says, "I will do some things out of my goodwill, but I'll have to be asked very nicely to do it, and then I will have to be thanked for it. You will have to thank me for everything," and generally made a fuss of. To make a fuss of is a phrase of fuss. It means to treat a person or animal with excessive attention or affection. Fuss means exaggeration. But any of you 40-hour-a-weekers who expect to be waited on hand and foot on Saturday and Sunday with no thanks for it are in for a nasty disappointment. Might go off for the weekend, perhaps. She tells them, "But any of you 40-hour-a-weekers, any of you who work few hours, how many hours a week, who expect to be waited on hand and foot." To be waited on hand and foot means to provide everything that someone needs or wants, to act as a servant to someone. "You will have a surprise," she says, "if you expect that everything will be served on the plate." on Saturday and Sunday with no thanks at all. You are in a nasty disappointment. You are in for a nasty disappointment if you think so. If you think that you will get served on Saturday and Sunday without thanking me for it, you are going to be disappointed. I might go off for the weekend, perhaps. I might go off means I might go somewhere for the weekend. For the weekend, perhaps. Doris is aghast. She's horrified. She's filled with horror. She says, "Go off for the weekend." She cannot believe her ears because their mother doesn't go anywhere. And she says, "Why not? I could do with a change. Stuck here day after day, week after week. If I don't need a change, who does?" Stuck means being trapped somewhere or in something. For example, you could be stuck in mud, like being trapped in a mud. To be stuck means to be unable to move from a particular position or place, or unable to change a situation. You could also say, "This door seems to be stuck." Mrs. Pearson, and of course we know that this is Mrs. Fitzgerald in Mrs. Pearson's body, she says, "I'm stuck here. I'm trapped here day after day, week after week. And if I don't need a change, who does?" She needs a change. Doris, her daughter, she asks her, "But where would you go? Who would you go with?" They are just very surprised that their mother is now behaving so differently. And she says, "That's my business. You don't ask me where you should go and who you should go with, do you?" She says, "Do you ask me? Where do I ask you where are you going and who you should go with? You don't ask me this. I don't ask you this, so you will not ask me as well." And Doris says, "That's different." "Well, the only difference is that I'm a lot older and better able to look after myself. So it's you who should do the asking." Her mother says, "It is you who should do the asking because I can look after myself. I can take care of myself." Doris says, "Did you fall or hit yourself with something?" And Mrs. Pearson says, "No, but I'll hit you with something, girl, if you don't stop asking silly questions." Now Doris stares at her open-mouthed, with her mouth open, ready to cry again. Oh, this is awful, and she begins to cry, not passionately. Passionately means forcefully. She is just crying. She cannot believe what she is hearing. Her mother tells her, "Stop blubbering." Blubbering means crying like a baby. It means to sob or to weep, to cry noisily and uncontrollably. "You are not a baby," she says. "If you are old enough to go out with Charlie Spence, you are old enough to behave properly. Now stop it." Mrs. Pearson, who is Miss Fitzgerald, is making fun of Doris. Doris is very pampered. Now, George Pearson enters left. George Pearson is Mrs. Pearson's husband. He is very proud and he is not as respected in society as expected. But he dominates his wife and now he is in for a rude surprise. He enters left. He is about 50 years old, fundamentally decent. Fundamentally means basically. He is basically decent, basically nice, but solemn. Solemn means formal, sincere, or serious. He is serious. Self-important means arrogant, full of oneself. Pompous. Pompous means overbearing or self-important. Someone who likes to show. someone who likes to exhibit self-importance. He is arrogant. Now it is said that preferably he should be a heavy, slow-moving type of a person. And he notices Doris's tears. He says, "Hello, what's this? Can't be anything to cry about." He is very surprised to see Doris crying. And Doris says, through sobs, through tears, sobbing means crying noisily, taking sudden deep breaths. She says, "You will see." And Doris runs out left with a sob or two on the way. She runs away crying. And George, Mr. Pearson, he stares after her. He looks in amazement at her, and then he looks at his wife, or at least at the person whom he thinks it is his wife. He says, "Did she say you'll see?" And Mrs. Pearson interrupts him. She says, "Yes." "What did she mean?" And Mrs. Pearson says, "Better ask her. Why are you asking me?" Now, Mr. Pearson is surprised. He has no clue what is happening. He looks slowly again at the door and then at Mrs. Pearson. Then he notices the stout that Mrs. Pearson raises for another sip. His eyes almost bulge. Mrs. Pearson looks after his daughter Doris, and then he looks at his wife, Mrs. Pearson. Then only he notices that she is drinking the beer. When she raises her hand to take another sip. Sip means a small gulp of beer. And his eyes almost bulge. To bulge means to stick out, to swell. He is very surprised to see his wife drinking a beer. Dear students, this is part 2 of Play Mother's Day, written by John Boynton Presley. Have a nice day and see you soon.